This is a Braver Angels debate, and we'll invite you to go ahead and put yourself on mute so that we can all hear what's going on. So, all right, we are here to have a collective search for truth. This is an awesome time. We see that you're coming from all over the country. That's very exciting. So the topic tonight is education. My name is Cynthia O'Brien. I'm in beautiful Portland, Oregon, and I'll be your chair this evening. And our Zoom manager is Morgan. We have a wonderful staff behind the scenes that you'll meet in just a moment. So we're closing the general chat function now so that we can focus on the task at hand. You will still be able to send a message through chat to the debate staff. You'll need your two side windows open, so everybody please click on the participants to open the participant window. Make sure that your chat window is also open because you will need those. At the top of the participant list, you'll see our wonderful all-volunteer staff. They're called whips, and one of these is your personal debate assistant. You should know who it is. Whatever your name begins with the letter A and so forth. So if you need any assistance, if you have any questions, if you want to make a speech, you're going to use the chat to your whip. If you're confused about anything, chat to them. They're really helpful. Okay, so for those who are new and a refresher for the rest of us, what is a Braver Angels debate? It's not a candidates debate or competition. The main difference between our debate style and others, it's the spirit of it. We consider it a collective search for truth. We're not trying to win. There are no teams. We're trying to share what we really do think and try to get closer to the truth. These are hard questions. We only debate hard questions. And that's why the number one rule of our floor is say what you believe. This is what we call a Braver Angels community debate. It means anybody can speak. The first couple of speakers were recruited from the registration list just to kick things off, up to 4 minutes each. We're going to alternate affirmative and negative, in favor of the resolution, opposed to the resolution. And you don't have to have a prepared speech. Some of the best speeches are when you hear somebody say something and you think, oh, I have something to say about that, and then you sign up to speak. So I did something a little different this time in that I emailed a whole bunch of people who had registered and said they were willing to speak. And so I think I've exchanged something like 75 email messages in the last 24 hours with a good number of you who are really smart and experienced, and you have some good things to say. So I'm really excited about this debate tonight and about the perspectives that you are bringing. So we encourage you again to tell personal stories. That helps people know where you're coming from. You can use humor. This is supposed to be fun. We can talk about anything really, as long as we use the right spirit. And most of the time I'll invite, if you ask for a clarifying question, you can ask a question after a speaker, 1 or 2 questions. That's for clarifying. It's not for opposing or doing a rebuttal. But, you know, if there's something you're curious about. And if it doesn't sound like a kind of curious question, I'll gently remind you. So then near the end of the debate, we're going to be moving toward what are some next steps? What are things we can do in our communities that will be useful? And we're going to wrap up exactly at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 Pacific. So the topic tonight is education, and the resolution that provides a point of debate is resolved. Schools should reflect the communities they teach, racially, ideologically, etc. So if you would like to speak, send a chat to your whip. Let us know the gist of what you want to say. With that, I call this debate to order. And I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. Affirmative means you generally agree with the resolution. Mimi has agreed to speak first. So Mimi, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes. You'll need to unmute, Mimi. There you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I hope everyone can hear me through my microphone. Well, I speak in support. Schools should reflect the community they teach. So there are two arguments I have to support my position. Number one, I'm a former college professor. So to me, teaching always has twofold goals. One is on individual level, it's about the discovery and the self-discovery. The other is on the societal level, it's about how we cultivate a citizen who understands his or her place in relation to the world where she lives. So also contributes to the society with understanding of other individuals this individual interacts with. So without the racial ideological awareness and without the knowledge of our surroundings, teaching would become an ivory tower, disconnected and up in the air. I'm saying this from my own example. When I was a professor, we taught Homer's Iliad at my former college. Of course, it was a great book to read and teach to build one's culture and the literary knowledge. But you have to understand, my college in Midwest mostly comprises of regional students, and many of them do not really, they are first generation students, and many of them do not have a Euro heritage. For instance, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. So if you started to teach Homer's Iliad as a Greek epic model in the classics, and you teach the literary genre, the tropes, for instance, metaphor and hyperbole, it was very difficult to connect and to become relevant to the community, which means community is defined by my student body and their backgrounds and the community, the culture where we, our small town. So if you in ivory tower, that can be easily defeat the purpose of education and teaching. So that's number one argument given the teaching goals. My second argument is knowledge itself. Knowledge itself can only be useful when it's relevant to the learner. We study classics in order to understand the present. We study another society in order to understand our own society. And we study foreign language in order to build in bridges between cultures. So without this intercultural competency, we won't be able to recognize the ever-changing community. We won't have the open mind to the unknown and the difference popped out each day in our own community. So I give an example. I had students who spent one semester or 1 year studying abroad in Spanish and Chinese speaking countries. When they came back, they were equipped with some language and cultural competence. So our city picked up them to be ambassadors to welcome visitors from these countries. So, and also they help our community to build a sense of diversity so that they use Spanish or Chinese to the visitors there. It really make our community look good. It not only their knowledge is relevant to the community, their knowledge also transforms the community to be a more diverse, more cosmopolitan community. So they are really, truly, really intimately related. You cannot discard community from what you teach. That's my two arguments as a former college professor.
Thank you. And congratulations for being exactly 4 minutes. That was impressive. Are there any questions? And here's how you ask a question. You raise your electronic hand. If you go to the raise hand button, this is how. If you wave, I may not see you. So if you use the electronic hand to raise your hand like I'm doing right now, that will bring you up on my list. I'm gonna put my hand down. And then here's how you ask a question. In Braver Angels debates, we have parliamentary procedure and you ask it to the chair. So you say, Madam Chair, could the speaker clarify something, something? Or Madam Chair, could the speaker elaborate on? And so you ask a question to me so that it's not a direct question, and that just keeps everything the way we'd like to have it. So are there any questions of clarification or curiosity? Yeah, I'm going to call on Al Smith. Go ahead, ask your question to me.
Yes. I'd like to ask Mimi the question, if I lived in Montana, should I be taught geometry, civics, or English any way differently than if I lived in New York City?
Okay, and Mimi, you can answer, and we try to keep the answers to about 1 minute.
Right. It's not one size fits all. There are commonalities, for the universal curriculum, but there has to be particular curriculum focused on Montana as opposed to New York City, right? Because of the cultural background, it's very different. So the local and the cosmopolitan has to be in sync with one another. You cannot just hold on to one, discard the other. So there's universal curriculum, but there's also particularly local curriculum, local geared towards the local community. I think both are interrelated.
Thank you very much.
Madam,
And is there another question of clarification? I'll take one more, and that's Catherine. Go ahead. You can unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the speaker if I'm understanding correctly that it sounds to me like she's saying there has to be a balance. What would be kind of a general curriculum or a broad curriculum that pretty much every student would learn, but then a specific to what might be a local need of a community. So that's my question.
Okay.
Was
Mimi?
I clear?
Yeah. So I get it. So on the surface, there are two curriculum, but they can intertwine together. For instance, we go back to our question, the Montana and the New York, right? The shared question, for instance, American culture, you get a lot of commonalities. However, Montana is one of the major area for westward expansion. New York was not. New York was one of the first 13 colonies. So when you teach students, you have to, what American character are you talking about? 13 colonies from a loyalist from Britain, or you're talking about American character in the Wild West, the West expansion, Andrew Jackson's America. So, under the same topic, you can establish different dimensions to teach in order to be relevant to the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. So at the end of a questioning period, one of the whips is going to lower all the hands if you haven't lowered your own hand. So then we'll start fresh with the next speaker. We're going to now have a speech in the negative, and that's going to be from Linda Bergovsky. Linda, you can unmute, and you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am against the resolution. I live in a small town in the largest county in Maryland. Our town is surrounded by 93,000 acres of protected farmland called the Ag Reserve. While our county population is over 60% Black, Hispanic, or Asian Pacific Islander, my town is about 85% white. Our area is so beautiful and relatively affordable, it attracts a diverse population. We have a nationally rated magnet public high school that draws students from all over the country, all over the county, I should say. And our magnet programs are global ecology and world cultures, not agriculture. But it was not so long ago that the town was not welcoming to non-whites, and the Ku Klux Klan operated in our area. There are still pockets of people who espouse white supremacist views, probably more than I even know about. Our Black Lives Matter rallies attracted counter-protesters, and I see Gadsden and Confederate battle flags flying, even though Maryland fought for the Union. Which racial composition or ideology should our schools teach then? Who gets to choose which element of the community or culture is reflected in our schools? I want to raise up the example of South Lake, Texas, as one where a majority white community derailed efforts of its school district to respond to documented anti-Black racism at its public high school. What had been described as an idyllic place to raise a family had been revealed as one that actually ignored an uncomfortable truth for many years. Using the dreaded specter of critical race theory, The white majority created a schism in the community that will likely never be healed. Black families moved elsewhere, brokenhearted by a misguided culture war and rejected by people they thought were friends. But what about the white students left behind? What happens to them when they go into a world where people look and speak and pray and think in many and varied ways? How effective will they be when asked to meet the demands of a global and diverse economy? Will they be empathic and open-minded, or will they experience conflict when coming into contact with people from other cultures? Will they go back to Southlake to perpetuate the underpinning of anti-Black racism, or will they seek a community that invites many different voices? At best, what happened to Southlake schools was a Pyrrhic victory for white residents, but what a cost to pay in the name of reflecting community. We must understand that community composition is not derived organically. What we call community is actually constructed through the interplay of zoning and land use policies, real estate sales practices, lending practices, and the influence of government and community organizations. Widespread structural barriers to diversity have existed for hundreds of years in our country. While my community has acknowledged the need to do more, and our county school system is currently undertaking an anti-racism audit, I read daily of places that are turning back the clock to a time when racial segregation was not just de facto, but the law. I contend it is neither practical nor helpful to expect schools to remain insular when the communities in which they operate are ever changing and evolving. Through the oversight of nonpartisan boards of education and PSTAs, guardrails exist to ensure curriculum is meaningful to all students and stays abreast of best practices and current knowledge. Unfortunately, there are calculated, organized efforts from banning books to keeping transgender students from participating in sports to eliminate those guardrails in communities all over the country. I say, if we want our communities to grow and thrive, our public schools must reflect the broader world in which we all live. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
apologies, we're having a tornado warning.
Oh dear. Okay. Thank you. We'll entertain a couple of questions of clarification or curiosity. Cynthia, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Hello, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker, given the context that although I am fairly obviously white, my children went to excellent schools where whites were always in the minority and far into the minority. They grew up with an extremely wide range of peers in economics and race. And I would ask the speaker, do you feel that it would be necessary to choose one group or another group as this is our culture, rather than to be able to discuss how our culture, how our community got to be the way it is?
Okay, thank you. 1 minute to answer. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Cynthia. I do not, my concern is that one group doesn't get to decide what the culture is, and that it must be done in consultation with one another, but also with educators and other people who have a broad view of what the educational system is trying to accomplish. Your children were very fortunate to be able to go to school in a diverse community. That isn't the case in most places. I teach, and so that isn't the case. But I do not believe that anyone should get to say, this is what the culture is and this is what we're going to teach. It must be broad-based. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for the speaker of curiosity or clarification? All right, with that, the speaker is thanked. Oh, it's gonna move. It's gonna move pretty fast. So let's see. The one thing we do also is when you hear a speaker, if you like what they're saying or you appreciate that they got up there and spoke, you can use hands like this. Since we're not using banging, which happens in our in-person debates, you can do this, and we call it hands or jazz hands. So, all right. So we're going to I'm going to go ahead, Celeste, and entertain your question there. Uh, and so if you have a question for the speaker, you can unmute and ask it to me.
Yes, hello, Madam Chairman. I would like to ask the speaker, I didn't see much of a difference between what the current speaker stated and what Ms. Yang stated. So I didn't see that what the current speaker just stated, Linda, was in opposition. She
And do you have a
seemed
question
in
for her?
agreement. Yes, so my question is, Linda, how do you see what you just stated
How does she see? Yes.
is in opposition to what Mimi stated?
And thank you for the question, Celeste. And as I was listening to Mimi, I thought she and I are approaching this from different perspectives, and we may in fact come to the same conclusion, and that is the braver angels way. That is so representative. My perspective was, who gets to decide what is community, and who gets to decide what of the community is reflected in schools to prevent a dominant culture from making that decision on behalf of its community. So I think our differences were how we defined community. She defined it in terms of population. I was defining it more in a physical place that has people that come and go and change over time. I think she was talking about the population of her students, the population in where she lives. So I see that as the primary difference, but as you've noted, perhaps they're really very similar in our assessments ultimately. I hope that
Okay.
answers the question.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. We're going to move to a speech in the affirmative, and the whips have let me know that Gary Holland is available to speak in the affirmative. Gary, are you ready to speak? You can unmute, and you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. I am mostly, but not entirely, a supporter of their proposition that schools should reflect the communities they teach. Certainly, a community school should take into account the characteristics of the community, not adhere to them blindly in a way that would be detrimental to the education of the community's children. That, after all, is the purpose of the schools, to educate the next generation. The political leanings, racial mix, economic realities are all important inputs to the defining of the educational experience, but only as a starting point and a set of considerations that must be taken into account. The objective is not to make the children mindless clones of the majority of the community, but rather to prepare them to go out into the world and not assume that every place, every practice, every thought, every person, every experience will be just like home. The kind of techniques that Braver Angels teaches should be embedded into the school environment, so there's a tolerance of differing views. And the emphasis is on learning from those differences and benefiting from that understanding. There really should be no room in the educational environment for rejecting a set of learning because it doesn't fit the worldview of a particular special interest group or political party or religious perspective. The question should be more one of how does this particular course or subject or book or movie or philosophical study better prepare the students for success in the world community. There are lots of things in today's world that are hard for communities, but just because you personally agree with a particular topic shouldn't translate into rejection without balanced discussion and consideration for how it might benefit the students as much as how it might harm them, and then move forward in the direction that maximizes the educational benefit to the student and their eventual position as an adult of the world. Taking stock of the major economic, demographic characteristics of a town is critical in developing effective education. Where things are unbalanced, extra efforts are needed to prepare our youth for very different characteristics of the broader world. For example, in my town, the median income is in the 99th percentile, and the racial mix is almost 90% white, 5% Hispanic, 3% Asian, and 1% Black. So how is it that the children in my town can possibly have an appreciation of what it's like to grow up as poor or Hispanic or Black? if we don't find ways to expose them to some of those realities. A simple example, the recent obsession with tearing down of statues of historic figures or renaming buildings when a historical figure is known to have behaved inappropriately by today's practices. For example, being a slave owner, a member of the Communist Party, a ruthless robber baron, industrialist in the Golden Age, etc., seems not only an overreaction, but misses major educational opportunities. Rather than tearing down the statue or renaming the building, perhaps it would make more sense to focus discussion on the good and bad things those individuals did and how society has changed so that behaviors that were accepted at one time are no longer acceptable. And more importantly, how we must protect against those behaviors going forward. Just about any controversy can be approached in this fashion, be it critical race theory or gender studies, sexuality, anti-Semitism, red versus blue, etc. Our schools should not run from these subjects because a significant and or vocal part of the population aren't comfortable or are loudly against the subject of the topic. The focus should be on how we make sure the next generation thinks through challenges more fully, is equipped with techniques like meditation to help them deal with life stresses, are getting exercise of their body as well as their minds, are kind and grateful for the blessings of their lives, and able to tackle whatever bumps in the road that life puts forth for them. What I'd like to see is more cooperative efforts of the schools and community members coming together and working through these issues with the objective of finding consensus and not blind confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker, and I'll entertain a question or two of curiosity or clarification. David Froba, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes. Would you ask the speaker, please, if he thinks that a lot of conflicts that may occur between different groups of parents can simply be resolved by having an opt-out?
Okay, go ahead. You have about a minute.
I guess my initial reaction, without thinking about it a lot, it's a complex subject, but my reaction is that an opt-out is a cop-out. What needs to be determined, what needs to be worked through is what is in the best interest of the young person in their going forward life. And that should be in the curricula. So I'm not sure that an opt-out really addresses the issue. All it does is push it down the road. And frankly, we suffer so much from having many of these complex issues just being pushed down the road for the next generation to handle because ours wasn't able to come to grips with it.
Thank you. I'll take one more question from Kathleen Smith. You can go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chairman, to the presenter, given the statistical reality that the majority of students in public schools today are what you might say minority or people of color, to what extent do you feel that elected school boards that may not in fact reflect the demographic of the majority of public school students in the United States would be capable of developing curricula that would address the best needs of the whole of a community?
Okay, go ahead and answer.
I'm not a demographic expert, but I do suspect that the assumption that the majority of public school students are minority students is probably not correct, but be that as it may, it is a challenge for a community schools to put together an educational program. Some states do it on a statewide basis. My state does it much more locally with some input from the state. It is a challenge to do that, but I think that by bringing in inputs from the community, from whatever the racial mix might be, and finding out what the interests and the concerns are, not only of the parents in the community, but also of the students themselves. And adding to that, the expertise that professional educators should be called upon to bring to bear in putting together a curricula, I think can be done. I'm not saying any of this is easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't have braver angels, but we do, and we work at trying to find ways to tackle these complex subjects and come to a consensus where maybe not everybody, where everybody is somewhat uncomfortable, which sometimes is the definition of the right answer, where everybody is slightly uncomfortable with whatever the result is.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. The reason we don't take more questions is that we want to give other speakers an opportunity to speak and ask questions. So we're going to move to a speech in the negative, and I wonder if Robert Scull is ready to speak.
Yes, I am.
Great. You have up to 4 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair, excuse me. I taught history in a community college in rural North Carolina for over 20 years. Before that, I taught in both a public school and a private school. Some educators promote choice in secondary education as though it were a consumer product. I disagree with this philosophy. When most of the white students in the school sign up for Western civilization and the Black students sign up for African American history, and other students sign up for feminist courses or military history courses, they enter a world in which groupthink is the norm. Doing this grounds them more in emotion of their physical identity than in their intellect, and divides us into factions. Choice actually weakens our ability to understand each other and participate effectively in a civil society, because the student is less likely to encounter divergent viewpoints that way. To some extent, we see the same thing in the university curriculum. One field assigns economics courses and another curriculum assigns sociology courses. Both fields have value, but when students are only exposed to one, they can't understand the perspective of the other. We would all be better off if we were required to take both or be exposed to both perspectives to a lesser extent, say in a history course, than for them to be segregated according to whatever their specialty is. Given a choice, many students, perhaps most of them, will choose something that they're comfortable with or that they already know quite well. I think, unfortunately, choice has been one of the contributing factors, just one of them, in the increasingly dysfunctional society that we see today. So I disagree with the statement, because I believe that one of the principal purposes of education is to give the student additional perspectives on the world that he or she has not encountered in their community. If you live in a certain community, you are going to be exposed to that community. You don't need to shape it more to your community. We need to have some common educational background so we can all communicate with each other again. My field was history. I think the purpose of learning history is not to develop a positive identity of oneself within a comfort zone, but to learn how to think critically and better understand the perspective of others. If we focus on that, I think our society would be better off. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take a question or two of clarification or curiosity. Don Goldberg, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Thanks. I have a question, Madam Chair, for the speaker. I agree with the speaker that having exposure to different kinds of courses, the Black person also exposed to European history, as a white person exposed to Black history, et cetera, economics and sociology. But my question is, if there's just so many hours in the classroom for education and a person wants to get more in depth in another field, how do you parse out the 101 courses so a person can get exposed to as many different points of view and then allow for electives to go more in depth to one of choice?
Okay, Robert, you have 1 minute to answer.
That's really an excellent question. And I think I would say that, unfortunately, even when we teach world history, there's a very heavy emphasis on Western civilization, largely because that's what we know the most about. I think we make a lot of foreign policy errors because we don't know enough about the rest of the world. Does that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
Got a couple more seconds here.
It's kind of hard to fully answer the question, but it answers it enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Devin, Canada, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Chairwoman, given that the speaker's background is in history, and in order to clarify his speech, in the past, we used to have a teaching that was called the lost cause inside most schools, but the northern states regularly rejected it. If there was some sort of universal guide, like for instance, if Woodrow Wilson would have placed it and made it where everybody had to teach lost cause, would the parents of the northern states have the right to reject it?
I think there's always at least two sides. Certainly in a war, there's always at least two sides. And when I taught American history, I tried to show the side of the British, and my students would criticize me for this. And when I get into the Civil War, I try to show the Confederate side as well. The point is to get them to think critically. It isn't to get them to feel good about their heritage, if that answers your question.
All right, and the speaker is thanked.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good job. So now we'll go to a speech in the affirmative. And as I've been talking to some people, just emailing back and forth, a lot of you say, well, kind of in favor of this, but then there's this, and you have a very nuanced position, and that is very welcome in Braver Angels. And I think this might be one of them. I had with Michael Abramson. And Michael, are you ready to give a speech?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you will have up to 4 minutes. So go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair. I was not really sure whether it's affirmative or negative regarding the resolution, but it's rather negative to how this resolution is formulated. Because our public schools do reflect the communities they teach. It cannot be otherwise. But maybe sometimes they reflect them too much, because in poor communities, we often have schools with poor discipline and poor performance, which are setting their students for failure. And is it what we want? I guess not. And public schools should fulfill a critical public service, teaching universal human knowledge and values. And I agree with Speaker Robert Scull, who was speaking in negative, but on this, I completely agree with him. There is no black or white physics. Aryan or Jewish physics and Western or Eastern physics or math or any other science. And studying history and literature should really study history and great literature and not serve as a conduit for propaganda of some question. And of course, schools have to provide connections to local communities, and this is also one of these universal humanistic values. But what about places where there are no communities? What about places ruled by gangs, by crime and fear? And I think in these places, schools should not reflect, but create communities of safety and civility for kids and parents and everyone. And they should protect kids from bullies regardless of their skin color or status of their parents. They should become the true community centers or the integral parts of such Harlem's children's zone. And there are other places. And schools who are playing this role, they need additional resources for doing this. And this is the opposite to what our public schools, they should be less concerned about diversity for the sake of diversity and focus on their core mission. High quality education and preparing students for life in modern society. They can and sometimes must for doing less. Thank you, and I am looking forward to your question.
All right, thank you. Hands for our speaker. And are there any questions of clarification or curiosity? John Dykers, you can unmute and ask your question to me. You gotta press unmute. There you go.
Madam Speaker, I wonder if our speaker would think there might be shades of difference in our comments on this question, depending on whether we were talking about grade school or graduate school and all the shades in between.
Okay. You have up to 1 minute to answer.
Well, I assume that we are mostly talking about K-12 education. So what is your question?
Well, I was wondering about the differences that we might be commenting, depending on whether we were talking about grade school or high school or college or graduate school. My experience mostly was in educating physicians who were in postgraduate education, their continuing education. So the relationship with the community was different in each circumstance.
Do you have a comment, Michael?
I suppose it is different, of course. It's good experience of schools at every level who are establishing good relationships with their communities and responding to them. I just don't think that it should be stated as a goal that necessarily schools at every level should reflect the communities, because it simply happens naturally. It should not be like some additional goal. And if it does not happen naturally, maybe there are some other issues.
Okay, is there another question for the speaker? Chris Cluett?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a quick question for the gentleman. I understand that science, as he's posed, have certain potentially universal laws, et cetera. But a lot of what we teach young people is how to create a community and how to create a nation in the future, which does have everything to do, in my opinion, with understanding who the community is. And that means oftentimes a diverse community. How does a speaker react to that? That it's not all science, sometimes it's poetry.
Hey, go ahead.
First, it's still science. There is psychology, there is sociology, and these sciences, they have some universal knowledge and universal experience accumulated from studying very different communities and very different experiences. And you cannot limit it only to your particular community. You have to learn from others and apply these lessons. But of course, besides science, there should be a place for poetry and for music and for all these other things that also are universal. You cannot just study music and music from all different countries and the best of it. And expand the horizons of your students.
Okay, and with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, good job. I'm now looking for a speech in the negative. And from my sign up, I see Alex Weisenfels. Did I pronounce that right, Alex? Alex, you can go ahead and speak. You have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I am negative on the resolution because I do not believe that parents should have blanket authority to decide what their children are taught as fact or moral judgment. However, I certainly don't believe the government should have that authority either. There is always a danger that a community can demand lessons that are bad for society, or that the government can demand lessons that are bad for the community. So there are two problems here. The first problem is that we're talking about absolute authority and where it should reside, when we should be talking about negotiation between people with different perspectives. The second problem is that we're talking about people deciding what to teach as facts and morality. And that's the sort of thing that winds up as dogma and propaganda, no matter who decides what it is, and even if it may not have started out that way. Each group seems to count on their ideas being trustworthy in all situations. But an education isn't complete without an understanding of how people come to treat different ideas as true or good, or how to recognize when an approach is constructive, even if it wasn't what you originally had in mind. Before we can talk about facts and moral judgment, we should be working out the foundational concepts of epistemology and ethics. So instead of designating the parents or the officials to decide, I recommend that communities and their schools get together to work out foundational concepts that people need to apply in order to be constructive members of society, and how those concepts can be taught in appropriate contexts. If we're a civilization, we need to agree on some basic principles which help people think and act constructively. And once we've got that mostly handled, then we can discuss what specific skills, information, and perspectives students will need so they can apply those concepts in contexts relevant to their own communities. And with the right conceptual building blocks, the next generation will be able to work together to build a world that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And are there any questions for the speaker? Curiosity or clarification? Marie McCormick, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if the speaker could give an example of of a foundational concept, and then of a more specific skill or fact, I believe were the words that would kind of flow from that.
Okay, yeah, about 1 minute for an answer.
Oh, of course. Let's see. So that is an excellent question. I think probably the most concise example would be the concepts of fundamental liabilities and the constructive concepts that can address them. Because every civilization needs to pay attention to 4 basic types of problems: scarcity, disaster, stagnation, and conflict. That's something that every society has to deal with. And right now, people either inherited answers to those problems from their cultures, or they try and figure out something new. And both options have mixed results. And so if we can learn how to deal with things constructively through investment, preparation, transcendence, and ethics to figure out things that make the situation stronger over time, then that's something that people will need to know to build up their own lives, their communities, and the world in general. Does that answer your question, or the question?
Thank you. And a question from Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In a gubernatorial race last year, one candidate apparently came across as saying that curriculum decisions should be determined by knowledgeable individuals without considering the desires of local parents. He lost. How does the speaker propose to make the decisions needed to balance the interest of the local population with the need for a broad-based curriculum?
Okay, 1 minute to answer.
Another good question. So there are certain concepts that allow people to approach situations and figure out what's going on and what their options are and what they might want to do about them. Basic concepts, mindsets like analysis, strategy, tactics, empathy, all things like that. And then we can apply those mindsets to specific contexts, because everyone uses mindsets. It's just a matter of calibrating them to a particular context, particular situation. So we can teach the same mindsets, but help people apply them to their own communities. So does that answer the question?
All right, thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, so we are now moving to 3-minute speeches. We have a lot of people that want to speak, so it'll be 3-minute speeches with the option of a question of clarification or curiosity. And Bob Mauro, would you like to speak? Speaking in the affirmative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the recognition and the opportunity to speak. I want to speak about the need for affirming the identity of transgender children in our schools. Most children, and most parents know this, most children have a formed gender identity by the time they have the language to express it. They probably have it even before then, but you don't know until they're able to express it. I am a retired pediatrician, 40 years of practice experience, just retired a few years ago. And I want to read just a paragraph that expresses this better than I can for what I got to see in my practice from time to time. This child is identified as A. We'll call her Alice. I don't know what her name is. Since Alice was 2 years old, she has been calling herself a girl despite being a natal male with typical sex development. So she was born with a penis and 2 testicles, is what that says. Her parents ignored or corrected her perceived misgendering, but after a year of tantrums and increasing anxiety, allowed her to grow out her hair and wear the clothing of a girl. When strangers called her a girl, Alice was thrilled. All her friends at school were female, and she continued to ask why God gave her a boy body when she was really a girl. After another year of discussions and increased social withdrawal, her parents decided to begin a social transition, introducing her as a girl and registering her for kindergarten as a girl. Since that time, she has become more outgoing and boisterous, with no indications of mental health challenges. She is a transgender girl, a child who consistently, persistently, and insistently identifies as female, despite, in this case, being a natal male. I think there are details that have to be worked out. Certainly, there are controversial issues, bathrooms among them. But I think that there are people in our society and in our schools who want to present the transgender identity as a hoax, something made up by what they would call the radical left. And I'm just here to tell you that that it's not so, particularly for children who identify so early, even in their preschool years, and persistently over time and across different settings. So the points that I would just conclude with, what I have learned is that first, gender identity does not correspond perfectly for every child to his or her sex assignment at birth. At a young age, children are able to express their confusion and distress at knowing within that they were not born for the gender role to which they were assigned, and if not permitted to express their confusion and distress within a loving and accepting environment, they will turn to self-destructive behaviors up to and including suicide. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And are there any questions of curiosity or clarification? All right. And I'm going to be looking for people whose voices haven't been heard yet first. So I'm going to call on Rita Chisholm. Rita, you can ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to the speaker. I am curious. I respect his position as a psychologist who has dealt with some of this, this issue more closely than your general public. My question is, it seems that there's such an outcry from people that are very forceful when you talk about the extreme left. But there's a middle ground to this where we need to talk about this much more in depth. But it appears to me that there is a push against just a learning curve here. Would the speaker mind making a comment on that as a society, we don't make changes just instantaneously, just when it becomes a big vocal issue. So I'm just asking, what is it going to take for us as a society to be able to discuss this without having this big push one way or the other?
Okay, 1 minute to answer.
Well, I agree with the questioner there that there's always a middle ground, and usually that's the best way. I'm not exactly sure what the questioner is asking. If you're implying that the teens and pre-adolescents may be influenced by their peers and may suddenly express a different gender identity than what they've been expressing for the first 10 years of their life, I think you're right to be suspect of that. That isn't to say in every instance that it's incorrect, but every one of these children calls for an individual answer, and you have to look very closely at the individual circumstances. And I think the parents need to be involved. Assuming the parents are reasonable and have the best interests of their child at heart.
Okay, and that was our one question. So the speaker is thanked. All right, so I'm looking for a speech in the negative, or you do not agree with the resolution. And I'm going to go to Susan Scott. Susan, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes.
Okay, you have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I will be brief. And I kind of want to build off of the comments of Alex speaking a moment ago, that I feel like, and I want to be very specific and clear that my opinions expressed are in the context of public K through 12 education. I'm not talking about universities. I'm not talking about private schools. But I think that the introduction of public education in this country was advocated by people who believed that education was a necessary prerequisite for being responsible participants in democracy and contributors to the society of our country. And so I think there are certain basic needs that are universal. And for example, I mean, I would really love to see education introduce teaching about logic, epistemology, and determining critical thinking. And so I don't think that public schools were established for the purpose of reinforcing a local culture or system. That they were established for the purpose of equipping students with the tools and skills that they need to be responsible participants in a country. In fact, I looked up the Department of Education. Their mission statement is to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. And even in 1958, the National Defense Education Act introduced the concept that the purpose of education is to ensure highly trained individuals to help compete on a global scale. So I think that we need to look at what the purpose of public education is in order to answer the question of how it should interface with local community culture and beliefs. And so we need to find a way for the public education system to fulfill this role of equipping students with basic necessary skills and competencies. And then we can do that in the context of cultural awareness, community makeup, that sort of thing. But the purpose of public education is not to reinforce a community culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker, and we'll take one question. Marie McCormick, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I was wondering if I'm thinking about some of the topics of the day that have become controversial and that there are attempts to restrict or ban in public schools, things such as discussions about systemic racism, discussions of gender identity. I'm wondering for the speaker where that falls and whether the speaker thinks that there's space or a place within that Department of Education definition for those types of topics.
Absolutely. And I think that approaching those questions through the lens of critical analysis and logic will allow us to untangle what forces are acting on this that are propagandistic and emotional versus what issues are based in fact. And I will take, for example, the fervor over critical race theory and the number of local legislations against that, when in fact, critical race theory is not taught in public K through 12 education. It is a non-problem. And so by critically analyzing what are the facts, we can say, okay, what's the underlying problem? Why are people uncomfortable about this? They may be uncomfortable because they have preconceptions about what social justice discussions entail, that it's not about blaming someone for a past fault. It's about looking at the past in order to find ways to do things better and more equitably in the future. So I think that applying concepts of critical thinking and logic to the fraught issues of the day will give us a tool for diffusing those and coming to a common ground.
Okay, thank you. With that, the speaker is thanked. All right. And we are moving to, I have been looking for a student who would speak, and Mila is going to speak. So we're at this point on speeches on the topic. I'm going to invite Mila if she would like to speak. And Mila, I think you might be on Lisa's account. Is that right?
Hello, my name is Mila, and I'm a high school junior who is homeschooled in the Bay Area of California. And I think that education, we need to be, with regard to public education, the purpose needs to be universal. As a nation, as a region, as a community, on so many different levels, we need to have discussions about, but really be aware of, our purposes in public education. And I think a good place to start, based on my beliefs and what I've seen from the other speakers, is critical thinking and how it is that we come to know the things that we know. So one example of this is that I think to a certain extent in public schools, we're somewhat sheltered by textbooks, where we aren't given access to a lot of different sources where we're able to determine what is an editorial versus what is straight news, but to a larger extent, weighing different perspectives that can each be bright in certain regards. To an extent, public education does need to be regional. It needs to be based in the communities. Something that a complaint that I've heard from my peers is that certain subjects don't feel that they'll be applicable later in life. And I think that part of the reason this occurs is because students feel that their education can be disconnected from the realities around them. And ways that this could be remedied is by allowing students to have an impact in their communities and apply what they're learning to improve their communities. However, I think that purpose of education cannot just be to train students, especially lower income students and students of color, to go into certain careers, to go into certain jobs and serve one particular economic place in the society. We need to create citizens. We need to create people who are going to be able to make informed decisions and a diversity of decisions, but ultimately decisions that are made together. So we need to be able to understand not just the perspectives that different groups have taken on a given issue, but how they come to those positions. We need to determine not just who is correct and who is incorrect, but how they came to know the things that they know, how they come to the reasoning that is behind their beliefs, the experiences that are behind their beliefs, and where the holes in that logic exist. We need students to, from an early age, I understand that this is more difficult when you're dealing with elementary school students, but even then, have an understanding of where knowledge comes from.
Okay. All right. Hands for our speaker. We'll take one question of curiosity or clarification. Donna Limper, you can ask your question to me.
Sure. First of all, Mom, great job homeschooling your child. Lisa, I wanted to ask you, you brought up something really interesting about
They'll ask about she. Mila is about her. Go ahead, third person.
Oh, sorry. you brought up something really interesting about students feeling disconnected from curricula. And so if we define a community as a community of the actual learners and the students, what mechanism do you think you could foresee where we could get the input of students in their own curricula?
Thank you for that question. I think this is a place where there needs to be more experimentation, more attempts. So I think one opportunity would be to teach civics classes, and as part of those civics classes, introduce students to the democratic process, but also speaking their own minds and speaking their own opinions, and then having that be heard beginning in their schools and local communities, but eventually echoing out to broader community. But I think we need to see more approaches to this. And I appreciate your question because it shows that it's something that is important.
All right, thank you. And with that, our speaker is thanked. Way to go, Mila. All right, so the people that have sent a chat to their whips or to me and have asked to speak, there are 13 people. 8 want to speak in favor, 5 want to speak against, and if we continue with 3-minute speeches, we won't be able to get everybody in very easily, but I'm going to try. So we'll continue with a couple more 3-minute speeches and see how that goes. And next on my list looks like Richard Procida. Richard, you want to speak in favor of the resolution?
No, actually, I think I'm speaking against it.
Okay,
Right.
hold that thought then, and I'll pick you up next after after an affirmative. Thank you. So Devin, Canada, did you want to speak in favor of the resolution?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Okay, you got up to 3 minutes. Go ahead.
So my actual position would probably be dead center. But when I read about what this debate was going to be about, I had to ask myself, why would we even have this debate? And usually you have a debate when something is dead center, when things get imbalanced. And you have to ask, where did it get unbalanced? For me personally, from what I was able to observe, just from what I'm able to perceive, this unbalance first started in a school in Michigan. No, not Michigan, Massachusetts. There was a school in Massachusetts that separated the white students from the black students, saying they wanted to keep the two races separate in order to give the black students a comfort zone. This went against the cultural norm and against the community at large. And then this escalated in other schools, in which they would tell the white students that you are what? Evil by birth or racist by birth, just on the basis of your skin color. These teachers that were teaching this and the board of educators that were promoting it, calling it critical race theory, regardless of whether or not the academics called that or not. And when the parents would confront the board of education and the teachers, they would be shouted down, oh, that's not critical race theory, nobody teaches critical race theory. And that was a way to silence those parents from complaining about those issues. And so it escalated. And then it escalated more in such places as Loudoun County. Loudoun County, and to be clear, they are at fault for their own board of education. They elected those people without ever looking at what they stood for. And were even warned that these new board of educators would teach radical things and push it. But those boards of education were elected. They had the opportunity to hear the parents speak, but when the parents spoke, the parents were shouted down. Some were even escorted by police. And so I believe that it's very important to know what caused the imbalance. And I think we need to shift back to a balanced point where both points, the parents and the teachers and our universal community, all have to be considered. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. Is there a question for the speaker? Leslie, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, I heard a string. I would like you to ask the speaker, Madam Chairperson, about the string of factual allegations that I heard, because I did not hear any basis for those factual claims or any reference to a source for them, but they are inconsistent with what I'm aware of. And so
Okay,
I
so
would
you're
like to know if there's a basis that that the speaker could cite or a source.
okay, Devin, would you like to cite sources?
I don't have any sources right in front of me. I studied this stuff a long time ago and we've run across it. And by this time, the debate has become so jumbled that all you're getting is big talking points. And it all pushed away from what originally lit the fire.
All right, and with that, the speaker is thanked. Right. So let's see. So Richard, I had you on the list to speak in the negative. Is that right?
Yes, yes. Can
Okay.
you restate the resolution?
Yes, the whips are putting it into the chat right now.
Okay. So my name is Richard Procida. I'm an attorney. I've written a book, a textbook. I go to academic conferences. I write opinion articles. I've been writing opinion articles since college. And while I find the question a little confusing because I think there's some assumption in it that is not correct. But I'm aghast by the very question. Because what is education? Education is about learning how to think. It's about learning about different cultures, learning about different ideas, learning to get into people's heads, about their culture, their ideas, history, even historical figures. You have to get into their heads. Okay? Education is about learning about other cultures. It's not about learning about our culture. It's learning about other cultures and other peoples. That's what education is. It's being taught how to think and about other ideas, and it should challenge students. It should challenge students. It shouldn't be something that we go into and we just say, oh yeah, that's what we all believe. That is propaganda. That is indoctrination. Now, and that's really been a big problem in this world. We have these algorithms that force us into people who all agree with us. We need to be exposed to different ideas. We need to be required, like the Fairness Doctrine did, to expose people to different points of views and different ideas, or else we're going to go down rabbit holes into our little cult-like communities and be completely disconnected from reality, not knowing how to criticize, think critically, and analyze the propaganda we're being fed. So one of the things that I'm confused is that I'm very much against the imposition of what I consider to be a selectively ahistorical and entirely too negative ideology to our students. And I think people should consider, is this really about selling programs and books and anti-racist trainings to school districts and companies? My experience has been negative with those things. And so that's my confusion, because we're assuming here that people just don't want a diverse culture. No, they don't want their children to be indoctrinated. They want, you can't tell me that our students don't graduate from high school not having learned about the Civil War, not having learned about the Civil Rights Movement. It's just not true. And so what confuses me is this false assumption that somehow, because to me, what's going on is that they're trying to impose propaganda on us.
All right, thank you. Hands for our speaker. And we'll take one question of curiosity or clarification. And again, I'll try to look for voices I haven't heard from yet. And so I will call on Rose. Rose, do you have a question for the speaker? You can ask it to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is, well, I agree with the idea of not indoctrinating our children in the schools. My question is, while we're learning or teaching the larger and broader topics of history to our children, don't you think that it would be, or doesn't the speaker think that it would be helpful to start teaching our children about their local history as well, especially since we're in such a globalized society where people are really forgetting their roots and where they came from? I just am wondering if you think we should not teach local history at all. As a native of Denver, I feel like my generational history is being erased every year, having been a 9th generation Coloradan. And
can you get to your question, Rose? Can you get to the question?
And nobody in our schools are learning about our local history. So that's my question is, wouldn't the speaker agree that we need to teach history that is relevant to our local societies?
Okay, Richard, you have up to a minute.
Absolutely. And we should teach it from different perspectives, not just one unitary, my culture, low experience, my opinion. We've come to a point where all of a sudden we just believe whatever we're told. And we get bought into these ideologies and we're not able to hear other people's opinions. And I'm the same way. And so that's what I think is what's most important in our culture right now, is that we learn not only about our history, local, national, world history, ancient history, you know, this stuff with abuse, racism, or domination systems, and a tyranny and oppression and prejudice and bigotry, you know, long before colonialism, long before capitalism. It's been going on since the ancient times. So we need to learn the full history, not just part of it.
All right, and with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. So our next speech, I see Michael Susi is interested in speaking in the affirmative. Michael, did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did. Which is
okay.
Funny, my own school district doesn't get it right. Okay, so
up to 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Of course. So I'm a first-year educator out of a minority school district in Connecticut. So our demographics are actually 55% Latino, 30% African American, 8% and 8% white, and then 3% Asian. I specifically teach with what are known as multilingual students. So I work with the students who just come in from Central South America, for the most part. I look in my hallway, though. I am a white male. We have 7 other social studies teachers, 2 of them which are women, and all are white. So yes, they should reflect the communities, and we should do whatever we can to get students, teachers who look like the students into the schools. But with the shrinking field in education, exacerbated by the COVID-19, exacerbated by teachers being overburdened with other responsibilities, we have to try to do as much as we can for outreach to get those, to get more teachers into the field. So obviously I'm happy to be in my job. The kids get a kick out of it because I, at the beginning of the year, knew no Spanish. And now I'm semi-proficient. So, but we have to do whatever we can to get those teachers into the field that look like their students, that students are engaged.
All right, thank you. And I would entertain a question of curiosity or a clarification for the speaker. Eric Weir, you can ask your question to me. You'll need to unmute.
Sorry, I
There you go.
notice when other people don't, but I forgot to
Yep.
myself. Well, just an observation. He didn't speak Spanish when he started this year. Now he's somewhat proficient. How important is it really to be exactly like the students we're teaching? Maybe we can teach students who are different from us.
Would the speaker like to speak to that?
That's a very good insight. I have Spanish speakers, I have Portuguese speakers. What really matters is that if the kids can see if the teacher cares. I have flags of all the countries in my classroom. Kids get a kick out of it when they come in and they try to look for their flag. So if we can't get teachers that are like their students, at least get teachers that show that they care. And it is important to know the language, to be able to understand the language so that there's not as much of a language barrier. Okay. So thank you for that observation.
All right. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. For a speech in the negative, I see Leslie Kaplan on my list. Leslie, would you want to give a speech? You have up to 3 minutes.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm curious about the resolution that schools should reflect the communities that they teach, and I was thinking about what that means. And I've heard a bunch of different interpretations. So the last speaker was suggesting that the demographics of teachers should reflect the demographics of the kids, or should not have to reflect the demographics of the kids, or that schools should teach what the parents want, or that schools should teach local culture. I'm coming at this from the perspective that I don't think that schools should reflect the communities that they teach, because I feel like the schools have already been compromised by policies that ensure that schools, particularly elementary schools, are too homogenous. We have neighborhood attendance districts so that kids who live near each other, which is often about property values, are going to school together, and then they're funded in that way. So towns that are wealthier have better school districts than cities that are less wealthy. And I think that that compromises our ability to, that's already too much reflecting the communities that they teach in negative ways. I feel like public schools should be places where the public meets each other. We're already too siloed. And the more that public schools reflect the communities that they teach, the more that we lose that shared experience. And I speak as a parent with kids in magnet schools in Jacksonville, Florida. The magnet schools in this city were created in the 1990s under a desegregation order. In the 1990s, we had to choose the experience of being in magnet schools, which allowed my kids to meet kids who did not live in our neighborhood. And I've been very grateful because it's helped my kids understand their own privilege and also develop understanding that the world doesn't look the same from every family's experience, and that they can be friends with kids who are different than them. I feel like there's terrible danger of becoming siloed, and terrible danger of having parents who are not educators requiring a curriculum that reflects their ideology and their racial experience, because I don't think that we all share them. I feel like the goal of, one of the speakers said this earlier, that the goal of education, public education, is to make educated citizens for the betterment of our country. We vote at the state level and the national level, as well as our local level, and so we need to be educated to reflect the demographics of our country, not our local neighborhoods. I'll just stop there.
All right, hands for our speaker. And is there a question of clarity or curiosity? Okay, Robert, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for the speaker. In regards to us being divided and everyone else being divided down through history, really. I mean, if you look at the very earliest complex societies, there was a division of classes, and we see this everywhere. And it seems to me that the elite has always wanted to divide those of us below so they can play us off against each other. And I see this throughout history, no matter where I look. So I'm wondering if you think it's possible that we're being divided according to a new theory on how to divide us. And I know that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but you know,
So is that your question?
we kind of expect it everywhere else. So why wouldn't we expect it here? Thank you.
Okay. Would the speaker like to address that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think that there is a lot that is being setting us up to be divided. And I think that some of the battles that we're waging, the culture wars battles, are absolutely designed to get people angry without really understanding what the issues are. And so, yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right. So many people who still want to speak. We're going to move to 2-minute speeches with no questions. So speak your piece. And if you want to build on something that somebody else said, that would be especially great. If you have a very different perspective than another person, then, by all means, articulate that so we can hear those differing perspectives. And so speaking in the affirmative, I want to call on Tina Luma. Tina, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I wanted to build on, I heard some excellent points about critical thinking. I believe the role of schools is to teach the student how to think critically. When you engage with this with yourself and your students, you're guiding them towards being a more respectful, resilient, responsible human beings. This requires collaboration with students, their families, educators, and support staff. So if we want our kids to think critically, we have to learn to think critically ourselves. So how do we do this? We need to create a strong desire to learn for the purpose of better understanding, taking some time to break down how we think and where it all comes from. We need to understand that students are so much more smarter and resilient than we give them credit for. We need to bring them into difficult conversations and wait. We need to challenge them to think critically and let them know that learning can be hard for adults too, and that's okay. When you don't have the answer or you're unsure, there is so much integrity in being able to say, I don't know the answer, but I can find more information and get back to you. It's okay to say, I don't know. Let's learn this together. Let's encourage our educators and families to adopt a more openly curious learner's mindset. Learning to ask good questions often holds more value than having all the answers. So I boil this down to a simple mnemonic device. How do we think critically? We need to flex our biceps. First is bias. How do my own values, beliefs, and experiences affect how I approach this information? What is the extent of the author's bias, and how does that affect how the information is presented? So where are we coming from? The intention, what is the overall goal? What do we want to accomplish through learning about this? What are the goals? What is the author trying to tell us? Context, what is the background? Where is the specific place or core ideas this information is coming from? Exploration, are we able to fully examine and reflect on all the moving pieces and dynamics of these ideas with a willingness to learn and better understand? Perspective, can we look beyond what's right in front of us? What can be learned by doing so? Can we learn something new or learn to see things a bit differently than we did before? Am I looking for affirmation versus information? How much of this is based on my desire to learn, to grow, to be challenged in order to guide my students in this truth-seeking process in a way that is engaging and readily applicable to all subjects and content areas?
Okay, so that's our time.
Not shield our children, sorry.
Yeah.
My last thought is, with these tools, students, families, and educators should be able to reflect critically about the world around them with intelligence, nuance, and integrity. Sorry, I kind of...
Okay, no problem. We're trying to get all the voices in. So speaking in favor, John Ramsbottom, would you like to speak for 2 minutes?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to keep it to that or less. I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, home of many headlines in the past year, but the most recent one has to do with a 3-week-long strike by the city of Minneapolis teachers. public schools were closed. I want to preface this by saying that I think the community could be made up of private school students and their parents as well, but I'm talking now about public schools. This strike, the demands by the teachers highlighted for me the cumulative effect of changes that have been underway in many places for a long time, combined with the impact of COVID. So we had a decline in the number of students in urban school districts, and when they leave, they take money with them. At the same time, class sizes remain large. Teachers wanted a cap placed on them. I think we can probably all agree that the smaller the class, the more effective the teaching. So what causes this? Is lack of investment in public schools, particularly urban public schools. How does that happen? Well, people have the freedom to move to other places, and they often do it in search of better schools. And in their mind, better means smaller class sizes, more activities, safety, whatever that might boil down to. And the result is we have in one segment of the public school system great inequality. How do we address this? Well, now I come to the part where I query the resolution. So I am in favor of the resolution. I think that schools should reflect the community, but I want to ask, what is the community? Is it the people who pay? Do they constitute the community? In that case, it would be everyone who votes for state government as well as local government. Or is it the people who care and who more likely live in the neighborhood insofar as there are neighborhood schools any longer? If it's the state, I think it's necessary to recognize that within a state there can be lots of diversity, many different kinds of school districts of sizes and needs. How is the state going to address that? If we look at the local level, the level of school boards, I've heard it said that it's natural that the schools will reflect the community, and I think that's true on a political level too. If there's anything like democracy going on, then the school board will be representative of different views in that community.
That's our time. Anything, you just wrap up?
That's fine. It's really a question.
Okay, great. And the speaker is thanked. Billy Donegan, did you want to speak against the resolution? Billy? I'm looking for Billy.
Hi, sorry.
Great. You have 2 minutes.
Really, if there are other speakers in line, I'm welcome to step away because much of the things that I mentioned have already been talked about, or I can talk for less than a minute.
No, that's fine. We'll go to Janet Skidmore. Janet, would you like to speak?
Yes, trying to
all right.
Myself.
Okay, 2 minutes. There you go.
Well, I'm a longtime public school teacher, 8 years full-time in the Chicago Public Schools, and more recently a longtime part-time substitute teacher in the Minneapolis Public Schools. And so now I teach in a wide variety of schools all over Minneapolis, and I feel I see the best and the worst of what happens in education. And the whole 3-week strike that Minneapolis just experienced, what for me is the elephant in the room, was never addressed. And I guess for me, I don't feel like it's being addressed in this debate. And that is that schools actually do reflect the communities they teach. And the way they do that is if you are a kid who lives in a rich, politically connected area, you can get a very good education in math, reading, writing, civics, and any number of other areas in your public school. If you live in a poor area, you will probably get an inferior or sometimes almost no education. If your family moves and you change schools 2 or 3 times during the school year, there are whole areas of instruction you quite possibly will miss. I've observed this to be the case in some 40+ years of teaching in large city public schools. In my opinion, we simply reinforce the class system we have in our society through our public education. Until kids in all public schools are required to be offered the same academics, I think it's beside the point to discuss what cultural subject matter they should be taught. Let's agree what academics all American 7th graders, for example, should study, what a 7th grader should know and be able to do at the end of his school year. And as an add-on, I think this objective approach might soften the political debate, because I hope all of us can perhaps agree that all children deserve to have a rigorous academic education. Let's start there.
Okay, thank you. The speaker is thanked. The next person we will go to is Elizabeth Viva Hines. You have 2 minutes.
Chair, I support the resolution. I think that the school should reflect the communities they teach. When I think of community, I think of the school community, not necessarily the community that the school is in. Just because if you bought your house, say in the 60s, like the neighborhood where I live, you probably weren't planning to move away after your children graduated from high school. It was probably your forever home. So you're probably no longer a customer to the neighborhood school. And so it's very possible that the community that the school resides in, the people who live in that community don't send their kids to that school anymore because they don't have kids to send there. So I think that the folks who are in the school building, the teachers, the principal, they should reflect the students that they teach. So not color. I'm not looking at like if you have 70% Black students, you need to have a Black principal. That isn't kind of where I'm coming from, but the folks who are in the school building should be respectful of the students who are in that building. So as an example, I am an immigrant from Nigeria, and I went to a high school in Pittsburgh, and I didn't like the lunch. I didn't recognize the lunch. I didn't want to eat the lunch. I wish that some of the lunch food that was served in the school was some of the food I was used to. So little things like that would have made me feel like this community recognized me as a student in that building. I agree with the speaker who spoke recently about about agreeing what academics should be. I think there should be an argument there about expectations for what a 3rd grader should be able to do, or a 7th grader, or a 12th grader. All of that everyone should be on the same page academically. I think it's all the nuances, the little things that we're all arguing over. And I think that's what makes it interesting living in an American community, is we all get to argue happily. So I just think that, the child is in the public school system for 18 years or so, but after 18 years, they're not done learning. They're still learning, they're still living in the community. So I don't think we should all be too anxious about, their learning is going to end once they graduate from high school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, the speaker is thanked. Speaking against the resolution, I want to call on Michael Amdur. Michael, would you like to speak for 2 minutes?
Actually, no, I had a question to throw out to the people who were pro. Is that okay? That was actually my intention tonight.
Why don't we just go ahead and allow that as your speech? Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. To those of you speaking who are pro, think of this. If schools, districts are to reflect the communities that they are, but the population of school districts around the country, let's say some of them have a very high transient rate, people moving in and out of those school districts, then how can an appropriate curriculum be developed if demographics in a school district, in a school community, change so quickly? I'd love for someone to answer that. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Speaking in favor of the motion is Donna Limper. Donna, would you like to speak for 2 minutes?
Sure, thanks, Madam Speaker. I do think schools should reflect their communities as long as the definition of community is broadly defined and with the understanding that we're all part of layered communities. So we all have multiple communities. We're part of a neighborhood, we might be part of a religious community, we're part of a state, we're part of a nation, we're also part of a global community. I think that universal public education is a cornerstone of a democratic, diverse republic. We do have the Common Core, so the nation has academic standards. But I think what this is about is that we need to empower our citizens in a democracy with the knowledge and teach them to think for themselves. And so what to teach can be determined in addition to the academics when the community and all of its diversity speaks to one another, and that includes the students, because I love what the young girl said about students wanting something that speaks to them more. But again, I do think the community needs to be broadly defined. I am very concerned about vocal, elitist, religious, or political groups dominating curriculum discussions in order to educate our nation's children in closed environments. I think that educational funding and content needs to address our society's increasing division along cultural, socioeconomic, and political divides by exposing students to multiple perspectives in both historical and current events. So for the gentleman, I think that taught social studies, if we're talking about, early America, there was a British, perspective, a Native American perspective, a French perspective, a Spanish perspective. And all of those groups thought they were right, but that could be then translated into current events.
Good. That is our time, and our speaker is thanked. So we have gotten through most of the people that said they wanted to speak, but we are committed to ending on time. So what we're going to do is close this part of the debate and move to two final items. So the first thing we want to do is ask you, what did you learn and what did you enjoy? So this is not a time to say you learned that the other perspectives are stupid, but it's a time to say what you learned or something you enjoyed or appreciated. We're going to open the chat so that you can put it into the chat, and we'll also hear from a few people. You can raise your electronic hand just like you did for questions, just like this. Raise your electronic hand, and I will call on a couple of you to just say what you enjoyed or what you learned. And I'm just looking for a phrase, a sentence, something you enjoyed, something you learned. And we're opening the chat so you can also put that into the chat. So Eric, something you learned or enjoyed?
Well, I learned, and what I learned and what I enjoyed is the fact that, in fact, there's not much disagreement on this topic. I couldn't tell the difference between the pro and the anti.
Thank you. Delcy, what did you learn or enjoy?
Sorry, I really thought I was going to have a chance to speak. Very disappointed I didn't get to.
Rita, what did you learn or enjoy?
I just want to thank everyone that lended their voices to this discussion, because I continue to learn new things all the time, and I really appreciate that we're talking about this and learning from one another, and I appreciate the civility that was brought here tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Jill, what did you learn or what did you enjoy?
I particularly enjoyed hearing how many people brought up the phrase critical thinking, logic, reason. That made my heart just filled with joy. So more of that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Mimi, what did you learn or enjoy?
I learned how to overcome binary thinking. Between black and white, there's a gray zone, different shades of gray. So the debate itself presents the gray zone. And I encourage brave angels to face critical race theory with courage. We touch it and we de-weaponize it. So Madam Chair, that's for you to think in the future.
Thank you. Catherine, what did you learn or enjoy?
Like a previous person said, I thought that I heard a lot more common ground than not common ground. And that I thought was really helpful. I liked hearing that. that we're closer together a lot of times than we are apart.
Thank you. Jeffrey Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair. I agree about the common ground, but the problem is that this is a group where there is going to be common ground. The problem are the extremes. And they're not on this call, unfortunately. I wish I had more time, but maybe for a future time. But education is critical, and I believe that we need to have the overlay of local community input to a master curriculum, and I hope
Thank you.
that goes forward.
Thank you very much. So we're going to close the chat again so that we can give you some really important links. And one is to our evaluation, which we very much want you to fill out. These links will also come to you in a follow-up email. So look in your email tomorrow for a follow-up, and it'll also have these links in it, or you can just click on them now. There's an evaluation. And Morgan, our Zoom whip, who's doing such a fabulous job, says, please click on it now so you can open the feedback window. And then we also have another debate coming up, which somebody's going to tell us about. But while we're working on that, I'm going to have Paul Norris just share for a minute about why Braver Angels is important to him and how you can be more involved. Paul, do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, so I actually found out I was going to be giving this pitch at the beginning of the debate. So I've just kind of pulled this together. I joined about 4 years ago, and I've served in a lot of different roles, and I've seen a lot of the activities of Braver Angels. Really recommend check our website to just see how many different activities there are. It's incredible. So why would you want to join? Well, you know, one reason is you just might believe, as a lot of us do, that there's a possibility that we're actually going to save our communities and maybe our nation by getting people to talk to each other. So I really encourage you, you know, become a paid member at whatever level works for you, and to become as active as you can. This is kind of a variant on an old saying, but seeing people as enemies and hating or fearing them is kind of like swallowing poison. And participating in Braver Angels is a great way to dissolve that poison. It's an antidote. It can also be a great personal experience. A couple of months ago, I realized that this is actually my tribe. You know, after my family, this is my tribe, and it is the most rewarding group of people that I have ever been a part of, other than family. And that's my pitch.
That's pretty awesome. Hands for Paul Norris. All right. So Paul is one of our executive team on the debate. We work weekly to bring these debates to you every couple of weeks. And one of the things that we do is we figure out what we think will be a good resolution. And when we're working on that, we test it among the committee, like, you know, is there a balance of for and against? Is there a balance of like red and blue? And do we think it's going to make a really good debate? And that's harder than it looks. And so we want to have a robust discussion. We want to bring in lots of voices. And so I do encourage you, when you're getting ready to come to a debate, if you know of somebody that has an opposing view or a different view, invite them to come now that you know what it's like, because we really do want to hear as many perspectives as we possibly can. So I'm going to ask my debate staff if there's anything else we need to say before we send you out with a song. Debate staff? We all good? All right. Well, thanks so much for coming. And again, we have a debate coming up. Does anyone on the staff have that in front of you, the topic and the date?
I just pasted it into the chat box.
Politically motivated propaganda.
Perfect. All right. Here it is. So our next national debate is Thursday, April 7th. And the topic, the resolution specifically, is punishment is a necessary part of criminal justice. Again, this is community style debate. So whoever comes, that's who we have. And we have lots of interesting people with great perspectives and experience. All right. Thank you, everyone. and good night.